What does it take for a mother to turn her own children into killers? Not just to ask them, not just to plant the idea, but to spend 9 months building the plan, recruiting her son the moment he walked out of prison, coaching her daughter to knock on a dead man's door and raise a phone to film it, and then stand there in the dark and watch. And not only that, to assign each one a specific role: the son for the blade, the daughter for the door, the lure, the camera, herself for the wheel, driver, architect, the woman who started all of this nearly a year before and made sure it finished the way she always intended. That is what this case is. It is not a crime of passion. It is not an argument that spiraled. It is a mother who decided a man should die, chose her children as the instrument, and then waited patiently, deliberately for 9 whole months until the pieces were in place. The man she chose was Paul Scott, 37 years old, a homebird, his dad said, someone who would ring from a night out at 2 in the morning just to say "I love you," someone who could light up a room, someone who dreamed, quietly and specifically, of a wife and children and an ordinary life that was close and warm and his. He knew they were coming, he said so. To his niece in the months before his death, he said the words plainly: "They're going to get me. You wait, they're going to get me." He was right. And when the knock came at 3:30 in the morning, he opened the door anyway, because the face on the other side belonged to someone he trusted. This is the story of how that trust was built, used, and destroyed. And it begins not in June of 2025, when Paul died, but 9 months earlier, with a fight that Paul Scott had nothing to do with except to try and stop it. In September of 2024, Joanne Maxwell got into an altercation. We don't need to dwell on the details of the fight itself. What matters, what this entire case turns on, is Maxwell's response to it. Because what happened in September of 2024 was not, by most people's measure, a catastrophic event. It was a confrontation, a dispute, the kind of thing that in most lives becomes a story you tell at Christmas about how you nearly lost your temper that one time. Paul Scott was there. His only involvement, police confirmed, was trying to split it up. He stepped between people. He tried to bring the temperature down. He did the thing that decent people do when a situation is getting out of hand. That was his crime. That was the entirety of what he did. At the time of the altercation, Maxwell's son Liam Donlin was in prison. That detail is not incidental. It tells you something important about how Maxwell's mind was already working in the hours after the fight, because her first instinct was not to deal with the situation herself. Her first instinct was to wait, to store the grievance, to hold it in reserve until the tool she needed was out and available. She began sending messages almost immediately. "Just wait until Liam gets out," she told people. "Time is ticking." Time is ticking. She sent that in September of 2024. Paul Scott had 9 months left to live. Her daughter Amy Clegg, 22 years old, was already inside the current. Clegg sent her own messages to associates that Donlin would, in her words, bang the F out of people. She told people her mum was trying to behave herself and not get arrested, but would get them all one by one. One by one. This is not someone venting. These messages were sent, received, read across multiple conversations with multiple people. Nobody challenged them. Nobody said let it go. The plan circulated among people who knew, and nobody stopped it. Here is what makes this case different from almost every other case of its kind. Joanne Maxwell did not act in rage. She did not act in grief. She did not act in the immediate blinding heat of the moment when a person does something they did not fully intend. She went home from that altercation in September. She made dinner. She went to sleep. She woke up the next morning and carried on. She did the weekly shop. She watched television. She sat through Christmas, whatever the rhythm of her ordinary life looked like, and the whole time, underneath all of it, the plan was sitting there, intact, patient, undisturbed. Picture the specifics of that. December comes. The decorations go up. People are buying gifts and wrapping things and putting food on tables. And Joanne Maxwell is moving through all of that with a man's name in her head and a plan she has already decided to carry out. The ordinary world moving around her, and underneath it, always, the intent she is tending like something she refuses to let die. Between September of 2024 and March of 2025, the messages kept coming, not in bursts of rage, steadily, consistently, to associates and people in her orbit. She kept the grievance alive the way some people tend to something they love. She kept feeding it. In March of 2025, 6 months before the murder, Maxwell sent messages to associates saying she had decided to get her son involved. Not vaguely, not hypothetically, she used the word decided. Think about what that means across a timeline. She sat with this intention through autumn, through winter, through Christmas, through the new year. She watched the weeks pass, and the plan did not fade, did not soften, did not lose its shape. By March it had hardened into a decision, so settled she was comfortable writing it down and sending it to people. And Paul Scott, across all of those months, was still alive, still ringing his dad in the early hours, still talking about the future, still living inside a life that a woman across town had already decided to end and never once reconsidered. Now, one thing this case raises, and that people keep coming back to, is the question of who Joanne Maxwell actually was before all of this. Because the specific shape of what she did, the patience, the planning, the recruitment of her own children, does not come from nowhere. This level of sustained, organized intent requires a psychology that has practiced control, that understands leverage, that has learned to treat the people around it as instruments rather than individuals. You don't build a plan like this across 9 months and then execute it with 3 people in a coordinated operation, unless command and compliance are patterns you already live inside. What the record shows, and we can only work from what the record shows, is a woman who, from the moment of the altercation, never experienced a single moment of doubt significant enough to stop her. Not when she sent the first message, not at Christmas, not in March when she committed her son's name to the plan in writing, not in the taxi, not in the car park, not when she got in the driver's seat. Grievance-based violence, where a perceived injustice becomes the organizing principle of a person's inner world, is not uncommon. What is uncommon is the patience of it, the cold and settled certainty that never heeded, never panicked, never reconsidered across 3 seasons. But the deepest element of Maxwell's psychology in this case is not the patience. It is the recruitment. She did not decide to act herself. She decided to use her children. That requires a very particular belief, that her grievance was their obligation, that what she felt she was owed was something they were required to collect on her behalf, that their bodies, their choices, their futures belonged to her cause, that family loyalty was not a feeling but a duty, and the duty in this case was violence. Liam Donlin walked out of prison and never got a free day. He came home to a mother who had a plan waiting. He stepped from one incarceration directly into another, this one with no walls, no guards, nothing to push against, just his mother's voice telling him what needed to happen and what kind of son he would be if he made it happen. Amy Clegg had spent 9 months sending messages, keeping score, staying current. She was already inside the plan. She already knew its language. By the time the night of the 21st arrived, her role had been assigned the familiar face, the knock, the camera, and she understood it completely. This is what a mother built, not in a moment of madness, over 9 months, with her children. By the 21st of June 2025, Donlin was out. He was on a night out in Blackburn. Maxwell and Clegg were separately out in Blackburn and Darwin. In one of the pubs they visited, Maxwell and Clegg got into another argument with someone connected to the original altercation. That argument did not create the plan. It ignited it. The plan was already there, already built, already decided. This was just the match. They left the pub and immediately tried to contact Donlin. Both of them, repeatedly. They met up with him 13 minutes after leaving. They got a taxi home together. In the taxi, Maxwell was heard saying they had to sort something out tonight. Clegg was on her phone telling her mum that Paul was 100% at a particular address, that he needs to be sorted. Donlin in the back seat, getting louder, angrier, saying he was going to teach him a lesson, saying he was going to get it. In a taxi, with a driver, out loud, without lowering their voices. They did not go directly to Paul's house. They went home first, a matter of minutes inside. What they did in those minutes tells you everything. They picked up kitchen knives. Maxwell took the driver's seat, Donlin in the front, Clegg in the back. Driving to Paul's house, Donlin sent an audio message to an associate. Pause here for a second, because this is the part that separates this case from almost everything else you've heard. Imagine being that associate. It's past 3 in the morning. Your phone lights up with a voice note from Liam Donlin. You press play, and what you hear is, "I'm going to stab him right now." Then another message, then another. He's nomming targets. He's promising to film the murder. He's promising to post it on Snapchat to put the killing of a man on a platform as content for an audience like it was something to be watched and shared and saved. A notification, a post, a highlight reel. He said, "I'm going to absolutely chop this kid up now." Someone on the other end of those messages heard all of that in real time, and the car kept moving. And I want to ask you something directly. If that voice note landed on your phone at 3:30 in the morning, what would you do? Would you call the police? Would you call Paul? Would you even believe it was real? Leave your answer in the comments because I genuinely want to know, because someone got those messages that night and Paul Scott still died. They parked down the street to avoid being noticed. Clegg had Donlin's phone. She was ready to film. They chose Clegg to knock because they knew Paul was frightened of Maxwell and Donlin. They calculated correctly that his fear of the mother and the son might keep the door closed, but that the daughter, the familiar face, might get him to open it. They used her face as a key. They used his trust as a lock they already knew how to pick. Paul Scott answered his front door at just after 3:30 in the morning. He was bare-chested. It was the middle of the night, and there was no reason not to trust who was knocking. The footage exists. It begins just before he opens the door. It ends just after. In the seconds before the door opened, Clegg said, "Don't actually stab him." 4 words. From somewhere inside her in the very last moment, something surfaced and tried to say something. But the door was already opening. And whatever that part of her intended, it was 9 months too late. Donlin stabbed Paul Scott once, a single wound to the chest. The blade pierced through skin, tissue, and muscle and drove directly into his heart. Clegg filmed it, stepped back, returned to the car. Then she called 999. Not to help, to manage what came next. Think about what it takes to make that call. Paul's body is on the doorstep. The night air is cold. There is blood. She has just watched her brother drive a kitchen knife into a man's chest, and she has the footage on her phone. And she dials emergency services and gives them a fake name. She said she was Emily. Her brother was Callum. She said she didn't know what had happened. She didn't know how Paul had been hurt. She said she didn't know the address she was at. She spun the story calmly, in real time, standing in the dark outside the home of the man they had just killed. Then the call handler began walking her through CPR. And Clegg told them Paul was already dead. She said she didn't know what the call handler wanted her to do for him. He was still on his own doorstep. She had been there. She had filmed it. She knew exactly what CPR was being asked to attempt. She chose not to attempt it. And then she chose to speak those words, "I don't know what you want me to do," to a person on the other end of a phone who was trying to save a life she had helped take. Maxwell arrived at the scene and continued the lie. They just found him like that. Didn't know anything. 2 knives were recovered from Paul's sink, a third from the car. Paul's blood was found on one of the knives from the sink. All three were arrested. At Preston Crown Court, over 13 days, the jury heard everything. Donlan pleaded guilty to manslaughter but not to murder. Maxwell pleaded not guilty to everything, then changed her plea to manslaughter on the third day. Clegg pleaded not guilty to everything. None of them ever admitted to murder. Paul's father Billy spoke in court about going out for drinks with his son, about Paul talking to him over a pint, about the wife and children he hoped to have one day, about ringing home in the early hours from a night out just to say "I love you." Billy said, "I miss Paul and I will for the rest of my life." That man sat in that courtroom for 13 days. He listened to the voice notes. He read the messages. He watched his son's final moments played as evidence. And the three people who built the plan and drove to the house and knocked on the door and filmed it, not one of them stood up and said, "Yes, we did this. We intended this. We planned this for 9 months and we did this." 3 people, 13 days, not one admission. The jury needed 3 hours. Unanimous guilty verdicts on all 3 for murder. Maxwell and Clegg also guilty of possession of a knife. Paul's sister Jade said in her impact statement, "I can't quite believe we live in a world with such evil in it. Our Paul, the kindest soul that I've ever known, is gone forever." His brother Andrew said, "All his possible futures taken from him." And it is only after you sit inside those words, after you feel what was actually taken, that the sentencing numbers are allowed to mean anything at all. Liam Donlan, life in prison, minimum 26 years. Joanne Maxwell, life in prison, minimum 23 years. Amy Clegg, life in prison, minimum 20 years. Detective Superintendent John McNamara, speaking after sentencing, said this: "His killers may have been given a life sentence, but so have Paul's loved ones. That is where this ends. Not with the cell door. With the family that wakes up every morning inside a life sentence they did nothing to deserve and cannot appeal." Paul Scott knew they were coming. He told his niece. He said the words out loud, and when the knock came in the dark, he opened the door anyway, because the face on the other side was someone he should have been safe with. The kindest soul. Gone forever. And the people who planned it, drove there, knocked on the door, raised the phone, and lied to the ambulance while he was still dying, they are still alive. If this case got under your skin the way it got under mine, the next one will hit even harder. I'll see you there.